My stomach twisted into knots as I glanced down at my near-empty wallet. A single $10 bill lay inside, the last of my money until payday. My hands trembled as I hesitated, the weight of my own struggles pressing down on me like a vice. Rent was overdue, my electricity bill had a red warning notice, and I'd been stretching my groceries as far as they could go. But then I saw him. A boy sat alone in the back of the school cafeteria, hunched over his tray, pushing around an empty carton of milk. His uniform was wrinkled, and the hunger in his eyes was unmistakable. I had seen students struggle before, but something about him hit differently. Maybe it was because I had been in his shoes once, or maybe it was because I knew the look of someone barely holding on. I exhaled sharply. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He jerked his head up, eyes widening. His name was Aaron. He was one of my quieter students, never drawing attention to himself, always staying in the shadows. "You okay?" I asked. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I'm fine, Miss Carter." I could hear the lie. His body language betrayed him. The way he kept his arms wrapped around his stomach, the way his gaze darted to the food in other students' trays before quickly looking away. I didn't think. I just pulled the $10 bill from my wallet and slid it across the table. "Get yourself something to eat." His eyes widened, his hands hesitating before reaching out. "Miss Carter, I can't." "You can and you will." I forced a small smile. "I expect to see you with a full stomach in my class later, got it?" He swallowed again, this time with more difficulty. His hands shook as he took the bill. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, pretending my own stomach wasn't twisting in protest. What I didn't know was that this small act would come back to me in a way I could have never imagined. The exhaustion in my bones was becoming unbearable. Teaching was more than a job, it was my passion, my life. But passion didn't pay bills, and lately, I had been drowning under financial stress. I lived paycheck to paycheck, and my school's budget cuts hadn't helped. The administration had slashed salaries, cut resources, and acted like teachers could run on sheer willpower alone. I had been considering a second job, but the idea of working a night shift after spending all day managing a classroom full of kids was a nightmare. Still, I had made peace with my situation. I had no family to lean on, no safety net. It was just me against the world. Until that moment in the principal's office changed everything. "Ms. Carter," Principal Hargrove said, rubbing his temples. "I don't know how to say this." My heart plummeted. I had seen that look before. It was the look of someone about to deliver bad news they didn't want to give. "We're letting you go." The room spun. "What?" I whispered. "We have to make more cuts." He sighed, but there was no real remorse in his eyes. Just exhaustion. "You're one of our best teachers, but—" He didn't finish. I knew what he meant, but that didn't make the betrayal sting any less. I had given everything to this school, and now I had nothing. Nothing. I didn't remember walking out of the school. The sun was blinding, making my eyes sting, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not now. I could feel the stares of students and teachers as I passed them in the hallway. Whispers, pitying glances. Ms. Carter lost her job. She was one of the good ones. What's she going to do now? I clenched my jaw and kept walking. My car had broken down 2 weeks ago, so I had no choice but to walk home. The streets blurred as I moved in a daze, my mind scrambling for solutions. Rent, bills, food. The weight of it all pressed down on me. But as I rounded the corner, I heard a familiar voice. "Miss Carter." I blinked. Aaron stood there, holding a brown paper bag from a local diner. I forced a weak smile. "Hey, Aaron, what are you doing out here?" He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the bag. I was gonna bring this to you at school, but I heard what happened." His voice was hesitant, almost afraid. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's okay, Aaron." He shoved the bag toward me. "It's for you." My breath hitched. "Aaron, Just take it," he interrupted, his voice firmer than I had ever heard it. "You gave me your last $10. Now, I want to do something for you." I stared at him, my vision blurring. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt seen. I took the paper bag from Aaron, my fingers brushing against his for a second. The warmth of his hand was a stark contrast to the cold reality I was living in. Inside, there was a sandwich, some fries, and a bottle of water. My stomach twisted, but this time, it wasn't from stress. "You didn't have to do this," I said, my voice cracking slightly. Aaron gave a small shrug. "You didn't have to help me either." I let out a short, breathless laugh. "Guess that makes us even, huh?" He shook his head.
No.
"You changed my life." Something about the way he said it made me pause. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving me standing there, holding a meal I didn't deserve. Or maybe
I did.
I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my future, or the lack of one. I had no savings, no backup plan, no one to fall back on. By morning, my landlord was knocking. "You got the rent?" His voice was gruff, impatient. I swallowed hard. "I need a little more time."
He sighed.
"Look, Carter, I like you, but I can't keep giving you extensions. If you can't pay by the end of the week, you need to pack your things." The door slammed shut, and I let out a shaky breath. I was running out of time. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." A deep, commanding voice came through the line. "Is this Miss Carter?" "Who's asking?" I said cautiously. A pause. Then, "My name is Daniel Sterling. You helped my son." I sat up straight. "Your son?" "Aaron." My heart skipped a beat. Aaron's father was calling me? "I need to see you," he said.
Now.
I hesitated.
Why?
"You'll understand when you get here. I'm sending a car." I barely had time to process his words before I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find a black luxury car waiting outside. This was not what I expected. The drive was silent. The driver, a man in a sharp suit, didn't say a word. When we finally stopped, my jaw nearly hit the floor. A towering glass skyscraper loomed in front of me, its name displayed in bold letters. Sterling Enterprises. I was ushered into a sleek, modern office, where a tall man in a crisp suit stood behind a massive desk. "Daniel Sterling, Aaron's father." "Miss Carter," he said, his voice calm but authoritative.
"Sit."
I sat. He studied me for a long moment, then said something that knocked the air from my lungs. "My son told me what you did for him. You saved him." I blinked. I just gave him lunch money." Daniel shook his head.
No.
"You gave him hope. And now, I want to return the favor." I leaned forward. "What are you saying?" A slow, deliberate smile spread across his face. "I'm offering you a job. A real one. And a fresh start." My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't real.
It couldn't be.
But the look in his eyes told me otherwise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I had almost forgotten.
Hope.
I sat there, my breath shallow, as Daniel Sterling's words sink in.
A job.
A fresh start. It sounded too good to be true. "Mr. Sterling," I said cautiously, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm a teacher. I don't have any corporate experience." His sharp eyes assessed me, and then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Ms. Carter, do you know what I do?" I swallowed. "You run Sterling Enterprises. You're one of the wealthiest men in the country." His lips quirked into a half-smile.
Correct.
"And do you know how I got here?" I shook my head. I wasn't born rich. I fought my way up. And along the way, I learned something valuable. People like you are rare. You care. You don't hesitate to help, even when you have nothing yourself. I stayed silent, my hands gripping the chair. "Aaron was at a breaking point," he continued. "His mother left years ago. I work late. I didn't even realize how bad things had gotten for him. But you did." Guilt tightened my chest. I hadn't done anything extraordinary. I had just seen a student in need and helped. "And that's why I want you on my team." I frowned. "Doing what?" He leaned back, fingers steepled. "I need someone who understands people. Someone who can help with our foundation, oversee scholarships, work with struggling kids, make sure they don't fall through the cracks.
I stared at him.
You want me to run a charity? His smile was knowing. Think of it as an education initiative. We'll give kids like Aaron a real shot. And you'll never have to worry about rent, bills, or losing your job again. My heart pounded. This was life-changing. But there had to be a catch. What's the salary? I asked, bracing myself. Daniel chuckled. Let's just say you'll never need to check your bank account before buying groceries again. I exhaled shakily. This was it. My way out. But was I ready? I barely remembered leaving his office. My thoughts raced the entire way home. A job like that? It was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. But fear clung to me like a second skin. What if I failed? What if I wasn't cut out for this world? My entire life had been spent in classrooms, shaping young minds. Could I really step into the corporate world? And then, I thought of Aaron, of all the students I had seen struggle. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every kid who had ever gone to bed hungry, every child who thought they weren't worth saving. I had been given a chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed. Daniel answered on the first ring. I'll do it, I said. His response was immediate. Good. Welcome to Sterling Enterprises, Ms. Carter. The next morning, I walked into Sterling Enterprises as an employee. The office was sleek, the kind of place that smelled of success and ambition. I felt wildly out of place in my second-hand blazer and scuffed shoes, but I kept my chin high. Daniel greeted me personally. You'll have an assistant, an office, and a team, he said as we strode through the halls. But first, I want you to meet someone. He opened a door, and my breath caught. Aaron sat inside, dressed sharply, but his nervous expression was unmistakable. Aaron? I asked, shocked. He stood up quickly. Miss Carter, I'm interning here now. Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. He wants to help, to give back. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was making a difference. And this was only the beginning. My first week at Sterling Enterprises was overwhelming. I was thrown into meetings, given reports to analyze, and expected to oversee an entire education initiative. It was a whirlwind of responsibility, and I barely had time to catch my breath. Aaron was by my side, working just as hard. He wasn't just an intern, he was determined to make a real impact. But not everyone was thrilled about my arrival. Some of the executives gave me cold looks. They saw me as an outsider, an inexperienced teacher who didn't belong in their world. She won't last a month, I overheard one of them whisper. That only made me more determined. I had been underestimated my whole life, and I was done proving myself to people who thought I was nothing. One morning, I walked into my office to find my proposal reports missing. I had spent hours working on them, making sure every detail was perfect. But now they were gone. Panic surged through me. Had I misplaced them? Aaron frowned. This doesn't make sense. You had them last night. I knew the truth. Someone wanted me to fail, but I refused to let them win. I stayed up all night, redoing everything from scratch. By morning, I walked into the meeting with my head high, reports in hand. Daniel glanced at me, then at the skeptical executives. Any issues, Ms. Carter? He asked smoothly. None at all, I said firmly. The looks on their faces were priceless. A month passed, and against all odds, I thrived. The education initiative was taking off, students were getting scholarships, and struggling schools were receiving funding. But one final test awaited me. A high-stakes meeting with investors. If I failed, the initiative would be scrapped. I stood in front of the room, my heart pounding. Powerful men and women watched me with skeptical eyes. And then I spoke. I told them about Aaron, about students who needed someone to believe in them, about what it meant to give kids a future. When I finished, there was silence. Then, one investor clapped, and another, and another. We had secured full funding. We had won. With my job secure, my next challenge was personal. I went back to my old school. Teachers welcomed me with warm smiles. But the principal, the man who had fired me, looked uncomfortable. "Miss Carter," he said, forcing a tight smile. "What brings you here?" I handed him a folder. "This is a grant for the school," I said. "Your students deserve better resources." He blinked in shock. "You got this for us?" I nodded. "I did." He swallowed hard. I'm sorry for how things ended." I smiled. "I'm not. Because it led me here." And with that I walked away. Stronger. Wiser. Unstoppable. Months later, I sat in my office, looking at a new case file. A struggling student. No money. No support. I picked up the phone. "Aaron, we've got work to do," I said. Because I had been given a second chance. And now I was making sure others got theirs too. With the education initiative thriving, I found myself busier than ever. We had students from all over applying for scholarships, kids who had been forgotten by the system. Every file I opened was another life in need of saving. Aaron worked tirelessly beside me, more driven than I'd ever seen him. One day, he placed a folder on my desk. "This one. I think you need to see it." I opened it and felt my stomach drop. It was a girl, about 15, living in a shelter with her younger brother. Straight A student, desperate to escape poverty. She reminded me of Aaron. She reminded me of myself. "We need to meet her," I said. And just like that, our next mission began. We drove across town to a small, rundown shelter. Inside, we found her, Mia. She was thin, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but when she saw us, she stood tall, her chin raised. "Are you social workers?" she asked, her voice wary. Aaron smiled.
"No."
"We're here to help." I knelt beside her. "You have good grades. A strong mind. You just need a chance." Her lip trembled. "No one's ever given me one before." I reached for her hand. "That changes now." Mia's situation was complicated. Her legal guardian, an uncle, refused to let her go. Not because he cared, but because he collected government checks in her name. "This is my family business," he sneered when I confronted him. "And you don't get to interfere." Anger burned through me. Aaron clenched his fists. "She's not your property." Mia stood behind us, shaking. I met her uncle's gaze, unwavering. "You're going to sign over her custody. Now." He laughed. "And why would I do that?" I smiled coldly. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure every government agency in this city is investigating you by tomorrow morning." His smirk faded. And within an hour, Mia was free. Mia moved into a dormitory funded by the initiative. For the first time in her life, she had safety, stability, a future. But trust didn't come easy for her. One night, I found her sitting outside, staring at the city lights. "You okay?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know how to be happy. I've never had this before." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to figure it out alone." For the first time, she smiled. And I knew she was going to be okay. Just as things seemed to settle, trouble found its way back. Sterling Enterprises had competitors. Powerful ones. And one of them wanted to see us fail. "Miss Carter," Daniel said, placing a newspaper on my desk. The headline made my stomach drop. "Corruption Scandal. Is Sterling Enterprises exploiting students for profit?" "This is a hit piece," I said, furious. Daniel's expression was unreadable. "It's a test. They want to see if we break." I straightened my shoulders. "Then let's prove them wrong." We launched a press conference, inviting journalists to meet the students we had helped. Mia spoke first. "This program saved my life," she said, her voice steady. "Without it, I wouldn't have a future." Other students followed, sharing their stories. By the end of the conference, the narrative had shifted. We weren't the villains. We were the heroes. And the people trying to take us down, they had just lost. Even after clearing our name, I knew the fight wasn't over. That night, I received an anonymous message. "This isn't over. Walk away, Ms. Carter. Or next time, it won't just be bad press." I gripped my phone, my pulse pounding. Someone wanted me gone. But I had come too far to back down. And if they thought I was afraid, they were dead wrong. I knew we were being watched, and I knew they would strike again. So, I set a trap. I leaked false information about a new deal with investors, knowing our enemies would try to sabotage it. When they did, we caught them in the act. Daniel exposed their corruption, and within days, they were the ones facing scandal. You played them, Aaron said, eyes wide. I smirked. They underestimated the wrong teacher. Just when I thought I had seen it all, Daniel called me into his office. He looked uneasy. I need to tell you something, he said, about why I hired you. I frowned. Because of Aaron? He exhaled.
Partly.
But also because... He slid a document across the desk. I read it, and everything I thought I knew changed in an instant. The document was an old case file. My case file. Daniel met my gaze. I knew your name long before Aaron ever mentioned you. My breath hitched. My parents, I whispered. He nodded. I knew them, and I knew what happened to them. Tears blurred my vision. You knew they were taken from me? He nodded. And I've been watching over you ever since. My world tilted. Everything, my struggles, my pain, had led me here, and I had never been as alone as I thought. That night, I revisited my past. I sat with Daniel, listening as he told me stories about my parents, the kind of people they were, the dreams they had for me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to grieve. But I also allowed myself to heal. And in that moment, I realized my journey wasn't just about saving others.
It was about saving myself.
Months passed. Mia graduated, heading to college with a full scholarship. Aaron was thriving, stronger than ever. And me? I was no longer the struggling teacher who had given her last $10. I was a force to be reckoned with. Sterling Enterprises' education program had expanded nationwide. More students were being saved. And for the first time, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Just as I thought I had seen it all, I was given one last test. A new school, on the verge of shutting down. Underfunded. Neglected. I visited personally. The principal, an older woman, looked at me with hopeless eyes. No one cares about these kids, she said. I smiled. I do. And with that, I knew what I had to do next. I poured everything into that school. Funding, resources, mentorship programs. And within a year, it transformed. Test scores skyrocketed. Attendance improved. Lives were changed. And when I stood at that school's first graduation ceremony, watching those students receive their diplomas, I felt something deep in my soul. This was my purpose. One night, I received a message. From Aaron. It was simple. Thank you for saving me. Tears filled my eyes. Because the truth was, he had saved me, too. And as I looked out at the city skyline, I knew one thing for sure. I had finally found my place in the world.